The comment you refer to, I believe, comes from a 2005 speech that Putin delivered to the Russian politicians. And what he said was that the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest calamities in modern history. Not the greatest. There's a lot of people that misrepresent this. One of the greatest. But then he explained it because overnight, tens of millions of Russians were without a home, were without anything. They were homeless. And he said this was a failure on the part of Russian leadership, a failure on the part of history. So there's your answer. He gave this statement in 2005, 6 years into his presidency, and it was commenting on the fact that the collapse of the Soviet Union disenfranchised tens of millions of Russians, Russian-speaking people, ethnic Russians who no longer had a homeland, and they were oftentimes found residing in countries that didn't want them there, that were resentful. 1 minute, they're part of the Soviet Union. The next minute, they're nothing. And he said that this was unacceptable, and he had a duty and responsibility as the president of Russia to care for these people. And when you say, well, why would he say that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a calamity? Vladimir Putin's made it clear that he's no fan of Soviet authority. He doesn't long for the return of the Soviet Union. What he does is resent the decade of the 1990s. Ask any Russian who lived in the former Soviet Union during that period of time how life was, how difficult life was, how you went from being a citizen of a superpower to being thrown away, cast away by a society that was unable to sustain itself, let alone sustain you, and the struggles of the average Russian trying just to survive. This was the Russia that Putin lived in. This is the Russia that Putin inherited in 1999. And this is the Russia that Putin saved, because there's no doubt about it. If you compare and contrast Russia today with what it was when Vladimir Putin inherited it, today is so much better. You can't find I challenge anybody, a single measurement that says, no, Russia was better off in 1999 than it is today. Not a single one. On every level, Russia is better. Could Russia have done better? Perhaps. But remember that Putin has been opposed by the West from almost day one. They didn't want a strong Russian leader. They wanted a weak Russian leader like Boris Yeltsin. They wanted somebody who would allow the West to continue to come in and economically exploit Russia for their own benefit, not for the benefit of the average Russian citizen. They wanted somebody to come in and destroy, I got a dog, destroy Russian democracy. People say, well, Putin isn't a real democratic leader. I say, really? Has he been given a chance? Because from day one, the West went in and tried to buy a Russian opposition. The British intelligence services are on record, caught cold-handed, sending money to political opponents. In Brazil, would you like it if the CIA came in and started paying your political opponents? No, you'd call that outside interference. The West has been interfering in what we call Russian democracy. But you can't have a democracy if the opposition isn't the voice, the genuine voice of the people, but rather the voice of Russia's foreign opponents. So it's hard for Putin to, A, struggle against this foreign interference, and B, at the same time, try to build a viable opposition. Because every time somebody comes up and says, I'm opposed to Vladimir Putin, the CIA comes in with briefcases full of money and corrupts that process. So it's not Putin's fault that there isn't a viable democracy. It's because the West doesn't want a viable democracy. Why do I say that? Because Vladimir Putin is a good leader. He's done good things for Russia. Maybe he's been in power too long. Again, that's not his fault. When the last time he tried to bow out of the election process, he recognized that there was nobody ready to replace him. That if he left, the people that would replace him would be corrupted by the West. So if the West stops corrupting Russia's democracy with money, with foreign influence and allows a Russian opposition to grow on its own, then there could be another leader. Putin would step aside. I can imagine that at the age of 70, there are things he'd rather be doing than running a country. I think he'd rather be pensioner, enjoying retirement, fishing, riding horseback shirtless, doing things that Putin does. But instead, he is condemned to govern a country that has no viable political alternative to him, not because he is suppressing it, because the West is corrupting it.